All right, let's dive straight into this explainer. Look, if you're tuned in right now, you already know that scaling an organization is incredibly difficult. You don't need me to tell you that. So today, we are entirely skipping the empty platitudes and generic best practice advice. Instead, we're going to perform a clinical, mechanics-based teardown of exactly why operational growth actually breaks down. We're getting into the deep structural logic of how organizations attempt to scale, why throwing new tools at a problem often just makes it worse, and the specific failure modes that trap so many companies.
Here is our roadmap for unpacking this organizational pathology. First, the illusion of tech adoption. Then we'll hit Mechanism 1, digitizing dysfunction, followed by Mechanism 2, the agility trap. After that, we'll cover managing passive noncompliance, embedding fractional leadership, and we'll wrap up with concrete conditional rules for scaling.
Okay, Section 1, the illusion of tech adoption, why software doesn't fix structure. We have to start by tackling a very common yet completely false premise, which is this idea that simply buying new software automatically triggers business growth. We see organizations fall for this constantly, right? They just assume that purchasing a brand new platform is going to magically heal a broken organizational structure.
This actually contradicts conventional wisdom entirely. You always hear that technology adoption is supposed to be this gentle, incremental step forward, just a safe, gradual modernization. But the structural reality is the exact opposite. If you're truly transforming your operations, you aren't just making a bad process slightly faster. You are fundamentally dismantling the old way of working and completely reconstructing it around new capabilities.
We need to draw a really sharp, non-obvious distinction here between point tool adoption and true transformation. Point tool adoption is basically just swiping a corporate credit card for a new software subscription. True transformation, on the other hand, demands restructuring your actual operations so they can absorb and leverage that new technical capability. Without that deep restructuring, the tool is, frankly, entirely useless.
Moving to Section 2, Mechanism 1, digitizing dysfunction, software layered over broken processes. This is where we see our first specific failure mode, and it always happens when your technology purchasing drastically outpaces your operational redesign. We have to explicitly name this pathology, so we know what we're dealing with. We call it digitizing dysfunction. This is a specific organizational failure where management decides to layer brand new advanced software right on top of broken, completely unexamined legacy workflows. They change the user interface, sure, but they leave the underlying structural process exactly as it was.
So what is the causal mechanism here? Why does this fail so predictably? Because buying tools without intentionally redesigning the human behaviors around them essentially guarantees the digital replication of your existing flaws. I mean, if a process is chaotic and produces waste, running it through a shiny new cloud platform doesn't eliminate that waste, it just ensures that bad information moves faster. You are literally just paying a premium to accelerate your own dysfunction.
Right, Section 3, Mechanism 2, the agility trap, speed without strategic alignment. Let's explore another failure mode that absolutely sabotages early-stage tech and AI initiatives, especially when teams decide to prioritize raw speed above everything else.
We categorize this specific trap as, well, the agility trap. This is a structural failure where speed is fatally mistaken for strategic progress. Organizations rush to implement advanced tech just to say they have it, but because these rapid, hyper-fast deployments are never actually mapped to specific business objectives, they don't compound into a real operational advantage. They just sit there as isolated, disconnected experiments that totally drain your organizational energy. To actually avoid the agility trap, there is a rigid structural progression you have to follow for every single technology investment. First, it must automate a critical process, not some random edge case, a critical process. Second, that automation absolutely must directly touch a managed business metric that leadership is already tracking. And third, you have to ensure the system actually learns from consistent operational input. If you skip any of these structural steps, you're just setting money on fire.
Section 4, Managing Predictable Passive Noncompliance, the Structural Reality of Resistance. Let's pivot to the human element of operational failure. When systems break down, leadership is always somehow surprised by team pushback. But we have to start treating organizational resistance not as some unpredictable attitude problem, but as a structural inevitability. The precise mechanism for this is something we call passive noncompliance. Notice that unmanaged resistance almost never looks like an active, noisy rebellion.
Instead, it happens very quietly. Employees simply route around the new systems. They'll log in to the new platform, sure, but then they creatively hack it to recreate their familiar, totally inefficient legacy workflows right inside the new tool.
And what's the causal link driving this? Resistance happens because operational changes inherently threaten established routines or perceived employee security. When people feel like their hard-earned expertise is being marginalized by a new system, their rational, structural response is to default right back to legacy behaviors to regain control. The failure of your shiny new workflow is directly caused by an unmanaged threat to their perceived security.
So, to absorb operational change without triggering all that passive non-compliance, you've got to follow a strict 4-pillar progression. 1. Assess organizational readiness first. 2. Engage your key stakeholders way before launching. 3. Actively manage that predictable resistance we were just talking about. And 4. You must measure success against clearly defined baselines. Skipping even one of these pillars undermines the entire foundation.
Moving to Section 5, Embedding Fractional Operational Leadership, Systems Building Without Full-Time Bloat. Now, what's the structural solution for companies that simply lack the internal capacity to manage these massive transformations? Let's look at how smart organizations are solving this through fractional operational leadership.
This actually completely contradicts how most people view consultants. The standard expectation is that you bring in an outside advisor, they deliver a nice slide deck, and then they leave. But structurally speaking, an outside advisor will absolutely fail unless they are treated as a peer executive and instantly embedded into the actual day-to-day leadership cadence of the company.
There is also a massive difference between applying a generic playbook and doing sector-specific constraint mapping. A generic strategy blindly assumes all businesses scale exactly the same way. But true operational leadership adapts those frameworks to highly specific constraints. Think about strict healthcare compliance boundaries or the crazy product velocity you need in the tech sector. You have to map the actual constraints. You can't just copy and paste a playbook.
Let's be totally clear on the structural requirements for making this work. Fractional leadership only successfully complements an existing team when they are joining standing meetings, participating in the real decision forums, and establishing direct, peer-level relationships with department heads. If they are kept on the outside looking in, the system building is guaranteed to fail.
Finally, Section 6, Conditional Rules for Scaling, Diagnostic Filters for Decision-Making. We are going to bring this explainer to its clinical conclusion right here. Based on everything we've just dissected, I want to give you some strict conditional decision rules you can use immediately. Here are your uncompromising, zero-fluff diagnostic filters. First, if operational complexity demands daily presence to prevent execution lag, do this. Convert your fractional leadership to a full-time role. Second, if an AI use case does not automate a process that directly touches a managed metric, do this. Abandon the deployment entirely. Third, if an initiative lacks clear baseline measurement before launch, do this. Halt the implementation immediately. And lastly, if resistance surfaces during rollout, do this. Treat it as a structural diagnostic, pointing to a flawed process, rather than blaming it on a bad attitude.
I want to leave you with a final, somewhat provocative thought. Take a really close look at your own organizational structures today. Ask yourself honestly, is your latest technology investment truly, fundamentally redesigning how you deliver value to the market? Or are you simply paying a premium to digitize your existing dysfunction? The difference between those two realities is the difference between an operation that scales beautifully and one that just shatters under its own weight. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this gives you the clinical lens you need to evaluate your own operations.